Major Carter stood on the balcony of the military compound, his eyes scanning the horizon as the twin suns of Thalxis dipped below the darkened skyline. The planet, once the jewel of the Galactic Federation, had fallen into chaos. Its tranquil forests and sparkling lakes were now tainted by the ravages of war. The Ithrian, once allies of humanity, had betrayed them. The Varkon, their brutal and unpredictable enemies, had seized control of the northern continents, pushing humanity and the Ithrian into an unholy alliance of convenience. The winds on Thalxis were always unsettling, an unnatural chill that cut through his uniform and made his skin prickle. Carter had grown accustomed to the discomfort, but it never failed to remind him that this planet, so beautiful and yet so hostile, had turned into a battleground. The planet's winds were said to be a symbol of the great rift between the two alien races, now locked in a bitter feud. He glanced at the monitor on his wrist, a map of the current war zones. The Ithrian had taken hold of the eastern mountain ranges. The Varkan controlled the north, and the human resistance, struggling to hold its ground, was scattered between the two. "Major," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Lieutenant Velka, the only Ithrian soldier left in his command. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, her bioluminescent veins glowing as if reflecting her troubled heart. "Command is calling for you. They need to discuss the next phase of the operation." Carter sighed and turned from the balcony, the weight of leadership pressing down on him. Velka was right. There was no time to linger on nostalgia or what-ifs. He had a mission to lead, and failure was not an option. The command center of the human military compound was a dimly lit, sterile room, filled with the hum of machinery and the quiet chatter of strategists and officers. General Walker, an older man with a face as weathered as the planet itself, stood over a holographic map, hands clasped behind his back. "Major Carter, we've received intel," Walker said, looking up as Carter entered the room. "The Ithrian are hoarding advanced weapons and supplies at a facility near their capital. We need to infiltrate and neutralize it before they can use it to reinforce their alliance with the Varkan." Carter felt a chill run through him. He had once trained alongside the Ithrian soldiers, fought beside them in mock drills, and shared in the victories of their combined efforts. Now, the thought of attacking them, of risking everything he had fought to protect, seemed impossible. "But sir," Carter said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his doubt, "how can we be sure that all Ithrian are on the same side? Some of them are still loyal to the original alliance." Walker's expression hardened. "We can't take that risk, Major. The Varkan are too close to victory. The Ithrian have already made their decision. We need to act fast before the whole planet falls into their hands." Carter nodded, feeling a sense of duty crystallizing in his chest. The Ithrian may have betrayed them, but it was humanity's survival that mattered now. Velka stepped forward, her presence a silent reminder of the ties that once bound their species together. "Major, you know better than anyone that the Ithrian are not all the same. But our chances of survival are slim without cutting off their supply lines." "Understood, Lieutenant," Carter replied. The decision was made. The mission was simple in theory. Infiltrate the Ithrian-controlled facility, secure the weapons and supplies, and exfiltrate before reinforcements could arrive. But reality was always more complicated than theory. The strike team, comprised of both humans and Ithrian loyalists, made their way through the dense jungle under the cover of night. The jungle was dense, with tall, twisted trees and thick, misty air. Strange alien creatures rustled in the dark, but Carter and his team were focused on their objective. The Ithrion base was only a few kilometers away, and the plan was to breach its perimeter quietly. Velka led the way, her bioluminescent skin flickering like distant stars in the blackness. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had once been a part of the Ithrion's elite infiltration units. She signaled to the team to halt as they approached the base, her glowing fingers pointing to a weak spot in the perimeter defenses. "Stay low, stay quiet," Carter whispered into his comm. The team moved swiftly, using stealth to bypass the advanced Ithrion security systems. As they reached the inner sanctum of the facility, Carter's heart beat faster. The walls were lined with towering containers of weapons, food, and medicine, resources vital to humanity's survival. They couldn't afford to let the Ithrion keep these supplies. But then, the trap was sprung. A deafening crack shattered the silence, and a high-energy pulse tore through the air, striking Lieutenant Velka in the chest. She crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath. "Ambush!" Carter yelled, rushing to her side. From the shadows, a familiar voice emerged. "Major Carter, you've been misled." Carter looked up to see Commander Althar, the once proud Ithrian leader who had spearheaded the alliance between their races. Now his face was cold and unyielding, his glowing eyes devoid of empathy. "You," Carter stammered, "you've sided with the Varkan?" Althar nodded, stepping forward. His armor glinted in the dim light, reflecting the chaos that surrounded them. "We did not side with the Varkan, Major. We chose the only path left to us. The Ithrian are no longer your allies." Velka gasped weakly. "You betrayed us." Her voice was barely audible as blood pooled around her. Althar's expression softened for a moment, but he quickly masked it. "You were naive, Velka. You should have seen it coming." Before Carter could respond, the ground shook beneath them. Explosions rang out from all directions as Varkan dropships descended from the sky, their massive engines roaring as they deployed troops into the facility. It was clear that the Ithrian and Varkan had already planned their final strike. The compound erupted into chaos. Varkan warriors charged forward, their hulking bodies wrapped in thick, armored exoskeletons. They wielded massive plasma rifles that fired in devastating, destructive bursts. Ithrian soldiers, some loyal to Althar, some unsure of their fate, fired indiscriminately, caught in the maelstrom of betrayal and desperation. Carter, adrenaline coursing through his veins, drew his sidearm and fired at a Varkan soldier rushing toward him. The shot was true, but there were too many of them. The Varkan were an unstoppable force, muscle and fury embodied. They fought with brutal efficiency, cutting through the human resistance and Ithrion defectors alike. "Get to the extraction point," Carter barked at his remaining team members. "We can't hold them off forever." As they fought their way toward the exit, Carter's mind raced. This was no longer just a military operation. It was a fight for survival. The Ithrion were fractured, and the Varkan had no honor, only conquest. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about what came after. Velka had been gravely injured, but she still held on to life with a fierce determination. As they moved through the chaos, she spoke one last time. "Major, you can't trust anyone now. The Ithrion, the Varkan, they've already decided our fate." Carter turned to her, his face grim. "We'll find a way, Velka. We'll fight back. We always have." But as they reached the extraction point, they saw the true scale of the enemy's might. Hundreds of Varkon ships loomed overhead, blotting out the sky. Their numbers were overwhelming. "We're not done yet," Carter whispered to himself, his eyes hardening with resolve. The war had only just begun. The extraction point was nothing more than a patch of dirt and cracked stone under the towering shadows of the Varkon dropships. Carter and his dwindling team had fought tooth and nail to get here. But the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the last of their group reached the rendezvous, a human dropship descended from the skies, its thrusters roaring. The ship's cargo ramp dropped, revealing a team of heavily armored soldiers, ready to pull them out. Carter didn't wait for a second invitation. He motioned for his team to board. "Get in, now!" he shouted. But as the last few soldiers scrambled onto the ramp, the ground below them trembled, and a deafening roar filled the air. Carter turned just in time to see a massive Varkon warlord, nearly 9 feet tall, charging toward them with a monstrous weapon. The warlord's eyes burned with fury, and his thick, scarred arms gripped an energy spear that crackled with lethal power. "Take off!" Carter yelled into the comms. "We're not leaving without him." The dropship hesitated, but the pilot had no choice. The Varkon were too close. The ramp started to lift, but not quickly enough. Carter made a split-second decision. He tossed his rifle to the side, drawing his plasma sword instead. With a deep breath, he charged forward, running straight into the warlord's path. Velka, barely conscious, reached for his arm. "Don't, Carter, it's too dangerous," she gasped. But Carter was already gone. The warlord swung his massive spear downward, aiming for Carter's torso. But Carter ducked at the last possible moment, using his speed and agility to weave between the Varkon strikes. His plasma sword hummed as he parried the spear with one swift motion. Sparks flew as energy collided with energy. The fight felt like an eternity, but Carter was quick. The warlord, heavy with muscle, but slow in his movements, was no match for the Major's precision and speed. With a final, desperate strike, Carter plunged his sword deep into the Varkon's chest, the plasma blade sizzling as it severed his heart. The warlord let out a final guttural cry before collapsing to the ground in a heap. Carter panted, his muscles burning from the effort. He turned, only to see the dropship's ramp closing, the noise of its engines drowning out everything else. He had to act fast. With the last of his strength, he sprinted toward the dropship. He could hear the roar of incoming Varkan soldiers, their massive footsteps thundering behind him. But it was too late. The ramp was almost completely sealed, his body crashing into the ramp with a sickening thud just as it closed. For a moment he lay there, gasping for air, the sound of his heart pounding in his ears. He didn't know how he had made it. He didn't know if he could keep fighting, but he had to. Velka, now stabilized but still unconscious, lay nearby. Carter turned and ordered the pilot to take them as high as possible. They had to leave the battlefield behind, at least for now. The dropship's engines roared to life as it ascended, carrying them out of the war zone and into the thinning clouds above. Carter's mind was still focused on the fight that awaited them. The war was far from over, but now they had a chance to regroup. The next several days aboard the ship were quiet. Too quiet. Carter, his team, and the wounded Velka were left to their thoughts as the dropship cut through the clouds and headed toward a secluded base in the southern hemisphere of Thalxis. The base was a hidden outpost, an old human military installation that had been abandoned years ago, long before the war had even begun. It was the perfect place to regroup, repair, and plan their next move. But Carter felt the weight of their failure bearing down on him. The Ithrian had betrayed them. The Varkan were everywhere. And the humans, well, they were scattered. They were losing ground. What remained of the alliance was crumbling faster than Carter could piece together. The briefing room was dimly lit when they arrived. General Walker was already waiting for them, his expression grim. Behind him stood a small group of surviving Ithrian soldiers, their eyes hollow with fatigue. They looked like shadows of the proud warriors Carter had once fought beside. Carter addressed them directly. "We need to know the truth. What happened? Why did the Ithrian turn on us?" One of the Ithrian soldiers, a young female named Alara, spoke up. "We had no choice. The Varkan offered us what you never could: victory. We were dying, Major. Our resources were running out. Our people were hungry, desperate. You couldn't understand." "Then why Velka?" Carter asked, his voice low and harsh. "Why betray her?" Alara's eyes flickered toward the unconscious form of Velka, who had been placed on a makeshift bed. Her voice trembled. "Velka was an idealist. She believed in you, in the Alliance. But there are more of us who saw things differently. We could not afford to be weak. The Varkan promised us the strength to survive." "And you believed them?" Carter's voice hardened with disgust. "I didn't want to," Alara replied softly. "But in the end, we had no other choice." Carter's fists clenched. He wasn't sure if it was anger, betrayal, or the crushing weight of responsibility. But his chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked from the room. "Enough," General Walker said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We have no time to dwell on this. The Varkan are assembling forces on the southern continent. If we don't act quickly, the entire planet will fall into their hands. Our priority is to strike back, take out their supply lines, and re-establish contact with the remaining human forces." Carter nodded, trying to clear his mind. "We'll need the Ithrian who are still loyal. We can't win this without them." Alara stepped forward. "We will fight with you, Major. We owe you that much." Carter studied her, then nodded. "We'll take what we can get. But if anyone turns on us again—" "Understood," Alara interrupted, her tone serious. "We fight together now, or we all perish alone." The days that followed were a blur of strategic meetings, skirmishes with Varkan scouts, and painful decisions. Velka was still unconscious, her wounds severe, but she was stable. Carter spent his nights at her side, grappling with the questions that weighed on him. Could he really trust the Ithrian again? Would Velka ever forgive him for what had happened? As the alliance began to take shape, Carter's team, along with their Ithrian counterparts, began to form a new strategy. The southern continent, rich in resources, had been converted into a staging ground for the Varkan. If they could cripple their operations here, it might slow the Varkan's advance across the planet. But it was not enough to simply disrupt their supply lines. Carter knew that to win, they would need to do something much more drastic. They would have to go after the Varkan's leaders. And that meant infiltrating the heart of their stronghold. As the operation loomed, Carter felt the burden of leadership more than ever. The lines between allies and enemies had become blurred. Trust had been shattered, alliances broken, and survival was no longer guaranteed. But there was one thing Carter knew for sure. No matter the cost, they couldn't let the Varkan win. Not on Thalxis. Not after everything they had sacrificed. The briefing room hummed with a low, tense energy as Carter gathered his ragtag group of soldiers. The air was thick with unspoken words, and the weight of what they were about to undertake sat heavily on everyone's shoulders. Carter could feel the strain in his own chest, the pressure mounting as he stared at the holographic map on the table in front of him. The Varkan stronghold was located deep within the southern continent, nestled in the heart of a range of jagged mountains. The base, once a fortified Ithrion facility, had been converted into a sprawling fortress, the central command center for the Varkan's operation on Thalxis. Carter's plan was simple, but the risks were astronomical. They would infiltrate the stronghold under the cover of night, strike at the Varkan leadership, and sabotage their command structure. The objective was to cripple their ability to coordinate the planetary invasion and disrupt the supply chains that had been fueling the war. If they succeeded, they might just have a chance to turn the tide in their favor. But there was a lingering question in the back of Carter's mind. What if it's already too late? Velka, now conscious but still weak from her injuries, stood beside Carter, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. She was still the most skilled combatant in their team, despite her frailty. But Carter could see the emotional toll her people's betrayal had taken on her. "I can't shake the feeling that this is a fool's errand," she murmured quietly, her voice distant. "The Varkan are too powerful now. They've taken everything from us, Carter. Everything." Carter turned to her, his expression softening. "If we don't try, Velka, then it is over. We have to fight for what we have left. For the people who are still counting on us." Velka's eyes hardened, and she nodded, her determination rising again. "Then let's do it." The rest of the team stood in silence, all aware of the magnitude of the mission. Elira, the young Ithrian soldier who had been one of the defectors, but now swore loyalty to Carter, was standing close by, her arms crossed. Her solemn gaze met Carter's. "We're with you," Elira said, her voice low but resolute. "No more games. It's time to end this." The operation began at dusk. Carter's team, now reinforced with a handful of loyal Ithrian fighters, set out under the cover of the rapidly darkening sky. The mountains loomed ahead, their jagged peaks barely visible in the fading light. The Varkan fortress, situated in the heart of this harsh terrain, was heavily guarded. Surveillance drones buzzed overhead and ground patrols combed the area with military precision. But Carter had learned long ago that war wasn't won by brute force alone. It was about taking the enemy by surprise. The dropship that had carried them to the southern continent had already been sent back to the base, and now they were on foot, weaving through the dense, rocky terrain. The sound of crunching gravel and boots on stone filled the air, but Carter's team moved quietly, like shadows in the night. They approached the fortress under the cover of the high ridges that surrounded it, following a narrow, winding path that only the most seasoned of infiltrators would know about. The air was thin, and the cold stung their faces, but Carter barely noticed. His focus was laser-sharp, every muscle tensed, every instinct on high alert. The fortress loomed ahead, a massive structure of blackened steel and alien architecture. Varkan sentries stood at regular intervals, their heavy armor and hulking forms barely visible in the dim light. But Carter had a plan. "We move in groups of 2, Carter ordered, his voice low and calm, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "Elira, you're with me. Velka, you take the rear with Zane and Alara. We neutralize the sentries quietly, and we move fast. No mistakes. Elira gave him a nod, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Understood. Carter and Elira moved first, slipping past the sentries and into the heart of the fortress's outer perimeter. The silence was almost suffocating, the only sounds being the distant hum of machinery and the occasional whir of surveillance drones. They reached the first guard station, a small, fortified tower where two Varkan soldiers stood, talking in low voices. Elira moved first. Her bioluminescent skin, normally a beacon in the dark, was now masked by a special dampening suit designed to hide her glow. She took one of the soldiers down in a swift, clean motion, snapping his neck before he even had a chance to scream. The other soldier never saw Carter coming. He was dropped to the ground with a quick shot to the back of the head. "Two down," Carter whispered into his comms. "Keep moving." The team pushed deeper into the fortress, each step fraught with danger. They encountered more sentries, more patrols, but each time, Carter's team executed with precision. The Varkan's military prowess was formidable, but they were predictable, their movements too methodical. Carter knew their weakness, overconfidence, and they were playing right into his hands. By the time they reached the inner sanctum of the fortress, the tension was unbearable. This was it, the heart of the Varkan command. It was here that their leadership resided, the warlords who had masterminded the conquest of Thalxis. If they could take them out, it would cripple the Varkan's leadership. But as Carter stepped into the main chamber, he found himself face to face with an unexpected sight. The throne room was empty. The walls, lined with Varkan banners and sigils, felt suffocating, like a tomb. The room's center was dominated by a massive, obsidian throne, but there was no sign of the warlords. Carter's heart skipped a beat. "Where are they?" he muttered under his breath. Elira was already scanning the room, her eyes narrowed. "Something's wrong. This place, it feels like a trap." "Stay alert," Carter ordered, his hand tightening around his plasma rifle. "We move fast. Find their command center." They moved quickly through the complex, descending deeper into the fortress. But the further they went, the more the atmosphere shifted. It was colder. The walls, once slick with the remnants of the Ithrian architecture, now felt sterile, unnervingly so. And then they found it. A vast control room, filled with rows of terminals and flashing lights. But what shocked Carter wasn't the technology. It was the sight of the Varkan leadership seated at their command posts, as if waiting for them. At the head of the room was a figure he hadn't expected. The one person Carter had never thought to face. General Call, the leader of the Varkan forces on Thalxis. Call's red eyes gleamed in the dim light as he stood, his massive reptilian frame casting a long shadow. He grinned, his sharp teeth bared in a cruel smile. "You were foolish to come here, Major Carter." Call's voice was deep, guttural, and filled with malice. "I have been waiting for you." The standoff was electric with tension. Carter's pulse hammered in his ears as he watched Call's every movement. The Varkan leader was a beast of unimaginable strength, with a mind as sharp as a blade. He had played them, led them into a trap. "You thought you could stalk the inevitable," Call continued, his voice mocking. "The Ivrian's betrayal was just the beginning. Your pathetic resistance means nothing. Thalxis is ours now." Carter's grip tightened on his plasma rifle, but Elira, sensing the danger, stepped forward. "You've made a grave mistake, General. You think you've won, but you've underestimated us. You underestimate me. Call's gaze flicked to Illyra, his lips curling into a contemptuous smile. You, a traitor, think you can defeat me? You're nothing but a shadow of what the Ithrian were. Your people are weak, Illyra. It is only a matter of time before the Varkhan crush you all. At that moment, the air shifted. An explosion shook the fortress, followed by a loud, guttural scream from the other side of the room. The sound of boots and weapons clashing echoed in the hallway. Carter's heart leaped. The diversion was working. The rest of his team had engaged the Varkhan reinforcements. The room was thrown into chaos. Carter didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, firing his plasma rifle at Call's forces, taking down the closest soldiers with precise shots. Velka, though weakened, had managed to get to her feet, her pistol drawn as she joined the fray. Illyra leapt into the air, her body glowing faintly in the dark as she engaged Call's personal guard. The battle raged around them, but Carter kept his focus on Call. The Varkhan leader stood tall and unmoving, watching the fight unfold, his eyes burning with rage. "You think this will change anything?" Call sneered, drawing a massive energy blade from his side. "You'll see," Carter growled, and charged. The room erupted into chaos as Carter lunged toward Call, his plasma rifle blazing. The crackle of energy blasts and the roar of combat filled the air. But in that moment, everything slowed for Carter. He was focused on one thing and one thing only: Call. Call's massive form moved with shocking speed, his energy blade flashing in the dim light as he parried Carter's shots with ease. Each swing of the blade cut through the air, leaving a trail of sizzling energy in its wake. The Varkhan general was a creature of pure, terrifying strength, but Carter was faster, more agile, and determined to end this. With a sudden, fluid movement, Carter dropped to the ground, narrowly avoiding a lethal strike that would have cleaved him in two. He rolled forward, using the momentum to rise and deliver a powerful shot straight at Call's chest. But the Varkhan general's armored exoskeleton absorbed the blast, and Call laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think you can kill me, human?" Call taunted, his eyes narrowing. "I've killed gods. You are nothing." But Carter's mind was working, calculating. Call might have been strong, but his arrogance was his weakness. Carter knew the Varkhan leader had one flaw: his overconfidence, and Carter was going to use it against him. "Maybe," Carter said, his voice steady, "but I'm not the one who's going to die today." Call charged forward, his energy blade raised for a final strike. Carter, anticipating the move, sidestepped at the last possible second. Call's blade cut through the air, but missed, leaving an opening. In that moment of vulnerability, Carter dove for Call's exposed side, driving his plasma blade deep into the Varkhan general's armored ribs. The Varkhan roared in pain, his massive body buckling as Carter twisted the blade. "Your reign ends here," Carter snarled, his muscles straining with effort. With one final brutal twist, Carter drove the blade deeper, piercing Call's heart. The Varkhan general fell to the ground with a deafening crash, his energy blade flickering out in a burst of sparks. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Call's labored breathing, which quickly slowed to a stop. Carter stood over him, chest heaving, his heart racing from the adrenaline. It was over. The sound of combat outside the control room slowly faded as the remaining Varkhan soldiers were overwhelmed by Carter's team. The Ithrian loyalists, led by Illyra, fought with a newfound resolve, while Velka, though still weak, proved to be a critical asset. As Carter wiped the blood from his plasma blade and turned to look at the others, he saw a mixture of exhaustion and relief on their faces. The battle wasn't won, yet, but this victory, the death of Kal, was a blow the Varkan could not easily recover from. "General Kal is dead," Carter said, his voice hoarse, "but we need to secure the rest of the base and disable their weapons systems. The Varkan won't be down for long." Velka limped forward, her face pale but determined. "You did it, Carter. You killed Kal." Carter gave a brief nod, but the weight of what they had accomplished only seemed to grow heavier. "It's not over. There's still too much left to do." The control room was now fully under their control, and Carter's team quickly got to work, hacking into the fortress's systems to disable the Varkan's command network. As Alira and Zane worked on the computers, Carter's mind drifted to the larger picture. The Varkan might have lost their leader, but the war was far from over. "We need to send a message to the resistance," Carter said. "This is our chance to rally the remaining human forces. We take out the Varkan's planetary communications network, and we have a shot at turning the tide." But even as he spoke, Carter knew there was still a storm brewing. The Varkan's sheer numbers and their relentless assault on the planet meant that this was only the beginning of the end. Thalxis was far from free. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Carter and his team worked relentlessly to disable the Varkan's remaining command posts across the continent, sending encrypted messages to the scattered human resistance forces. The death of Kal had sent shockwaves through the Varkan ranks, but Carter knew that the war was far from won. There were other warlords, other leaders waiting to seize control. The Varkan weren't a single unified force. They were a faction, a tribe of conquerors, and they would never be so easily defeated. It was during one of these raids, as they moved deeper into enemy territory, that Carter encountered something unexpected. "We've got incoming," Alira said, her voice tight with anxiety. "I'm detecting a new Varkan warship. It's not one of theirs. It's different." Carter's heart skipped a beat. He had fought the Varkan for years. He knew their tactics, their ships, their weapons. But this was something new. "Tell me you're joking," Carter muttered, his eyes scanning the data feed. The ship wasn't just larger. It was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Its shape was sleek, almost organic, and its energy signature was unlike any Varkan tech they had ever seen. "It's not Varkan," Alira confirmed. "But it's definitely not friendly." A low hum vibrated through the base, and a strange sense of unease gripped Carter's chest. This was something beyond the Varkan. A new threat had arrived, and they were about to find out just how dangerous it was. The warship descended from the sky, a sleek and terrifying presence that blocked out the twin suns of Thalxis. The ship's smooth, almost biomechanical design shimmered in the dim light as it touched down, its landing thrusters kicking up dust in all directions. From the ship emerged a group of beings unlike anything Carter had ever seen. Tall, angular, and with skin that seemed to shimmer with an iridescent glow, they exuded an aura of ancient power. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and their armor was sleek, made of materials far beyond anything the Varkan or Ithrian possessed. "Who the hell are these guys?" Velka whispered, her voice tight with fear. "We need to find out," Carter said, his mind already working through the possibilities. The Varkan might have been a threat, but this was something entirely different. And it wasn't just a threat to Thalxis, it was a threat to the entire galaxy. As the beings approached, Carter's team instinctively raised their weapons. But a tall figure at the front of the group raised a hand in a peaceful gesture. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and resonant, though it carried the weight of something ancient and powerful. "We are the Veilthar," the figure said, his voice almost melodic. "We have watched your war from afar. It is not your world that we seek, Major Carter. It is your future." The Veilthar, an ancient, enigmatic race that had existed for millennia, long before either the Varkan or the Ithrion had ever set foot on Thalxis. Carter's mind raced as he listened to the leader of the Veilthar speak. "You've done well to survive the Varkan's assault," the Veilthar leader continued. "But your struggle has attracted the attention of forces far beyond this world. The Varkan are merely pawns in a much larger game. You are caught in the web of a galactic conflict that has yet to reach its peak." Carter's mind reeled as the words sank in. The Varkan were pawns? That didn't make sense. The Varkan had always been a force of their own, driven by conquest and destruction. But if the Veilthar were telling the truth, then everything Carter had fought for, the war, the alliances, had just changed. "What do you want from us?" Carter asked, his voice steady despite the overwhelming flood of information. "We seek nothing but your cooperation," the Veilthar leader replied. "The Varkan's war is but a precursor to a far greater threat, one that will consume your galaxy if left unchecked." The weight of his words settled heavily over Carter and his team. They had barely begun to comprehend the full scope of the war they were already fighting, and now this new alien force, the Veilthar, had entered the fray. "Then tell us what we need to do," Carter said, determination returning to his voice. "We've fought the Varkan. We'll fight whatever comes next. We won't stop." The Veilthar leader's eyes gleamed with approval. "Then the real war begins now." The Veilthar shared their knowledge with Carter and his team, revealing the true scale of the galactic conflict. The Varkan, it turned out, were part of a much larger empire, a force under the sway of a dark, ancient race that sought to control the galaxy.